$1 billion does not simply buy a richer life. It changes which rules still apply. At the highest level, wealth can purchase access, speed, privacy, and influence on a scale ordinary success never reaches. But what does that power cost when nearly every human relationship begins to pass through money? The first divide appears between people who earn large salaries and people whose assets can keep producing wealth without their daily labor. A high income may fund an impressive home, luxury travel, private schools, and expensive routines, yet those routines still depend on continued earnings. Taxes, mortgage, insurance, tuition, staff, and lifestyle costs can leave even a prosperous household exposed when employment or business revenue suddenly changes. That is why serious wealth is measured through ownership, net worth, and liquidity, not simply by the size of a single annual paycheck. At several $1 million, many financial emergencies become manageable. But divorce, lawsuits, leverage, medical crises, or poor investments can still destroy years of progress. The house may be beautiful and the vacations frequent, yet major decisions still require restraint because one reckless commitment can permanently shrink the family's options. At this level, money provides comfort and protection, but it has not removed the consequences of an expensive mistake. The next transformation begins when investment income can support an entire lifestyle without requiring the owner to keep working for a salary. Private bankers, tax attorneys, estate planners, investment advisors, and personal assistants begin handling problems most people must confront alone. International travel becomes easier, medical access becomes faster, and multiple homes allow the owner to move between cities without rebuilding daily life each time. A private flight may still be chartered instead of owned, because even enormous fortunes can recognize the cost of maintaining an aircraft that often sits idle. Luxury at this stage is less about collecting objects and more about removing friction from schedules, travel, privacy, health, and personal obligations. The wealthy person no longer asks only whether something is affordable, but whether it is convenient, discreet, rare, or worth the attention required. This is also where social life changes because proximity to money attracts advisors, entrepreneurs, politicians, fundraisers, celebrities, employees, and opportunists. Invitations become more exclusive, introductions become more valuable, and relationships increasingly pass through assistants, lawyers, managers, security teams, or trusted intermediaries. Wealth creates access, but it also makes every new relationship harder to judge because admiration, ambition, dependence, and financial interest can look remarkably similar. Beyond tens of millions, the owner often controls a company, investment portfolio, property empire, or family fortune that reaches far beyond one household. The money can support staffed residences, private aviation, specialized security, elaborate collections, and travel organized around personal preference rather than price. Almost any commercial experience can be recreated privately, from a restaurant meal prepared at home to a concert performed for invited guests. Rare art, limited automobiles, historic objects, and custom-built possessions become attractive because ordinary luxury no longer signals distinction inside an ultra-wealthy circle. When everyone nearby can buy the expensive version, status shifts towards scarcity, provenance, privileged access, and objects that cannot be easily duplicated. The competition becomes subtle but relentless. One person owns the newest model, another owns the prototype, and someone else owns the company that built both. Comparison does not disappear when wealth rises. It simply moves into smaller rooms filled with people whose fortunes are even larger. A person worth $50 million may feel powerful in public and surprisingly ordinary at a gathering dominated by billionaires and old family fortunes. That psychological shift matters because wealth is experienced relatively, through neighbors, rivals, colleagues, and the private standards of a changing social world. The result is a paradox. Material limits disappear while the feeling of having enough can remain permanently out of reach. At the edge of billionaire status, money begins purchasing something more consequential than comfort, rarity, or protection from inconvenience. It can purchase immediate attention from institutions, executives, cultural leaders, and political networks that rarely respond so quickly to everyone else. Calls are returned, meetings are arranged, doors are open, and complicated requests move through organizations with unusual speed. This access does not guarantee obedience, but it dramatically increases the number of powerful people willing to listen. Billionaire wealth can finance campaigns, foundations, research, litigation, media ventures, lobbying operations, and entire institutions built around one individual's priorities. Subscribe to Fortunes and Ruins for more American stories about money, power, greed, collapse, and the consequences that remain after great fortunes reshape the world. Most billionaire wealth is not stored as cash because it exists through businesses, securities, real estate, trusts, and other assets whose values rise and fall. That distinction explains how a person can gain or lose billions on paper while no equivalent pile of money ever enters or leaves a bank account. It also explains how enormous fortunes can remain productive, with owners borrowing against assets while preserving control and avoiding the need to sell. At sufficient scale, the fortune becomes an economic system employing accountants, pilots, guards, household staff, lawyers, managers, advisors, and investment professionals. The owner's personal life may be protected by layers of employees whose full-time work is preventing delays, exposure, uncertainty, and inconvenience. Time becomes one of the clearest advantages because waiting can often be replaced with private transportation, delegated decisions, priority access, or direct service. A commercial airport becomes a private terminal. A restaurant reservation becomes a personal arrangement, and an administrative burden becomes someone else's responsibility. The wealthy cannot create additional hours, but they can prevent ordinary obligations from consuming many of the hours they already possess. This ability to remove friction changes daily life more profoundly than any mansion, sports car, watch, or expensive bottle ever could. At the same time, extreme wealth creates responsibilities and vulnerabilities that smaller fortunes rarely face with the same intensity. Security becomes constant, privacy becomes difficult, and a careless employee, hacked device, disputed contract, or public controversy can threaten an entire family office. Children inherit not only assets but expectations, surveillance, complicated trusts, public assumptions, and the risk of becoming targets before understanding the fortune. Family disputes can become corporate struggles when relatives hold voting rights, board seats, trusts, or competing visions for a shared empire. Divorce can divide ownership, succession can weaken control, and inheritance can turn private resentment into years of litigation. The same fortune that protects a dynasty from ordinary hardship can bind its members together through structures they never personally chose. Relationships also become harder to trust because generosity, employment, investment, friendship, and dependence may overlap inside the same private circle. A billionaire may never know whether agreement reflects loyalty, professional caution, financial need, or fear of losing access. The people nearest to the fortune may also be the people with the strongest reasons to avoid uncomfortable truths. Honest disagreement becomes rare, and isolation can grow even while the number of employees, guests, advisors, and acquaintances continues expanding. Extreme wealth can fund hospitals, universities, scientific research, disaster relief, cultural institutions, and charitable programs that improve millions of lives. Yet philanthropy also gives private individuals enormous influence over which problems receive attention, which solutions receive funding, and which communities are heard. That influence can produce real benefits, but it also places public consequences inside decisions made by unelected people and privately controlled institutions. A fortune this large is no longer merely personal property. It becomes a force capable of shaping labor, markets, politics, culture, and entire regions. Some fortunes expand through innovation and ownership, while others endure through inherited control, financial engineering, political access, or market power. The number alone cannot explain who carried the risk, who created the value, or who absorbed the costs when the fortune grew. Follow Fortunes and Ruins as we continue examining the American fortunes that created power, changed institutions, and left consequences far beyond their owners. No fortune can eliminate illness, grief, aging, betrayal, or death, even when it can purchase better treatment, safer surroundings, expert advice, and additional choices. The richest person in a hospital can still face a diagnosis that no aircraft, mansion, foundation, or financial instrument can reverse. That final limitation exposes the difference between controlling circumstances and controlling life itself. The 5 levels of wealth are not larger versions of the same life, because each threshold changes behavior, relationships, risk, responsibility, and perspective. Income creates comfort, assets create independence. Great fortunes create access, and billionaire ownership creates influence that can outlive the individual. But the higher the fortune rises, the more human contact becomes filtered through security, employment, reputation, obligation, and financial dependence. From the outside, the ultra-rich appear to live without limits because almost every visible inconvenience can be purchased away. From inside that world, the remaining limits become sharper because trust cannot be ordered, belonging cannot be delegated, and mortality cannot be negotiated. Money can remove nearly every obstacle standing between desire and action, but it cannot guarantee that anything waiting on the other side will feel meaningful. Behind a guarded gate, the staffed mansion, and the waiting aircraft, one locked door remains that no amount of money can open.